A country most Australians couldn't find on a map just seized an $800 million Australian gold mine, and the shockwaves are about to destroy retirement funds across the country. This isn't just theft, it's economic warfare, and Australia is losing badly. Right now, as I'm recording this, the ASX has halted trading on West African Resources, an Australian mining company that woke up yesterday to find their entire gold mine in Burkina Faso had been seized by the government. No warning, no compensation, no negotiation. Armed soldiers simply walked into the mine, told Australian managers to leave, and declared it now belongs to the state. David Chun discovered this when his phone started buzzing at 6 a.m. with notifications from his stock trading app. David is a retired teacher from Brisbane who put his entire $480,000 superannuation into Australian mining stocks because they seemed safe and profitable. I thought, these are Australian companies mining overseas. What could go wrong? David told me. In 24 hours, I lost $180,000. At 67 years old, I can't recover from this. But David isn't alone. What happened in Burkina Faso is part of something much bigger and more terrifying than one stolen mine. It's a coordinated attack on Australian economic interests that's being orchestrated by our biggest enemies. And our government saw it coming but did nothing to stop it. Let me show you the numbers that should terrify every Australian investor. The Kiaka gold mine that Burkina Faso just seized generates $795.6 million in revenue every year and produces 234,000 ounces of gold annually. It employs 2,400 people and was supposed to operate for the next 15 years, generating over $12 billion for Australian shareholders. With one government decree, all of that value just evaporated. But here's what makes this seizure even more shocking. The Australian executives running the mine were locked out by armed soldiers with no explanation. Sarah Thompson, a mining engineer from Perth, was working at the site when it happened. We showed up for work and there were military vehicles everywhere, Sarah told me. Soldiers with AK-47s told us we had 30 minutes to pack our personal belongings and leave. They said the mine now belonged to the people of Burkina Faso. The ASX immediately halted trading on West African Resources, affecting over 50,000 Australian investors who own shares either directly or through their superannuation funds. But this wasn't a random act of resource nationalism. It's part of a coordinated campaign that's been planned for years. Because while Sarah was being escorted out by soldiers, Russian Wagner Group mercenaries were walking in to take control of operations. Here's what the Australian media isn't telling you about what's really happening in West Africa. Russian mercenaries now control gold mines across the region that used to feed Australian companies billions in profits. This isn't coincidence. It's economic warfare designed to cut Australia off from critical resources while enriching Russia's war machine. Sarah Thompson saw this firsthand. As we were driving away from the mine, we passed trucks full of white men with Russian accents heading toward the facility, Sarah explained. Our African security guards told us these were the new bosses. 20 years of Australian investment, community development, and partnership gone, replaced by Russian mercenaries overnight. The Australian Strategic Policy Institute has been warning about this for months. Russian Wagner forces are systematically taking control of African resource operations, kicking out Western companies, and using the profits to fund Putin's war in Ukraine. Australian companies are being specifically targeted because Australia is seen as weak and unlikely to fight back. But the real betrayal came from inside Australia, because our own government knew this was coming and did absolutely nothing to protect Australian investments or investors. Leaked diplomatic cables obtained by investigative journalists show that Australian intelligence agencies warned the government 18 months ago that Burkina Faso was planning to nationalize foreign mining assets. The Department of Foreign Affairs even produced a classified report predicting Australia could lose up to $12 billion in African investments due to rising resource nationalism. What did our politicians do with this information? Nothing. They didn't warn Australian companies. They didn't pressure the Burkina Faso government. They didn't prepare contingency plans. They just watched as Australian wealth was systematically transferred to hostile foreign governments. But here's the part that will make you sick. Some Australian politicians actually profited from this crisis. Trading records show that several MPs sold their mining stocks and bought shares in agricultural and domestic resource companies just weeks before the seizures began. They used classified intelligence to protect their own investments while leaving ordinary Australians to lose their retirement savings. That's when I discovered the $2 billion Chinese deal that triggered this entire catastrophe. According to a former Burkina Faso mining minister who spoke to me on condition of anonymity, China offered the government $2 billion in infrastructure investment in exchange for nationalizing Western mining assets and giving Chinese companies exclusive future access to mineral deposits. The Chinese made us an offer we couldn't refuse, the former minister explained. They would build roads, schools, hospitals, and power plants worth $2 billion, but only if we kicked out the Australians and Americans first. They said Western companies were stealing our resources and we deserved better partners. Banking records leaked from Burkina Faso's central bank show $50 million in Chinese payments to government officials in the months leading up to the mine seizures. This wasn't resource nationalism. It was a Chinese bribery operation designed to steal Australian assets and hand them to Beijing's state-owned enterprises. The strategy worked perfectly. China now controls 60% of West African gold production that used to flow to Australian refineries and investors. Every ounce of gold that once generated profits for Australian shareholders now funds China's military expansion and economic dominance campaigns. But the most heartbreaking part of this story is how the African partners Australian companies trusted for decades orchestrated this betrayal for Chinese cash. James Bradley spent 20 years building relationships in Burkina Faso. His Australian mining company didn't just extract gold. They built schools for local children, funded hospitals for local communities, and employed thousands of local workers at wages far above the national average. James learned the local language, married a local woman, and considered Burkina Faso his second home. I trusted these people with my life, James told me. We were partners, not just business associates. When my company needed local expertise, they provided it. When their communities needed support, we provided it. I thought we were friends. But according to the mining intelligence report released last month, the African partners James trusted received over $200 million in Chinese payments to help orchestrate the seizure of Australian assets. The people James considered family sold him out for Chinese money. 20 years of friendship, community investment, and mutual respect destroyed by greed, James said through tears. They used our trust against us. They knew exactly how to hurt us most effectively because we'd taught them everything about our operations. This betrayal is happening across Africa. Local partners who worked with Australian companies for decades are switching sides for Chinese cash, bringing intimate knowledge of Australian operations that makes seizures swift and total. But the worst part is what's happening to ordinary Australians who had nothing to do with African mining but are paying the price for their government's failures. 847,000 Australian superannuation accounts lost money when mining stocks collapsed following the Burkina Faso seizure. That's nearly 1 million Australians who woke up poorer because their government failed to protect their investments from foreign theft. Meet Maria Santos, a 73-year-old grandmother from Adelaide whose retirement fund was heavily invested in African mining operations through her industry super account. I never even knew my money was invested in Africa, Maria explained. I just trusted my super fund to grow my savings safely. Now I've lost $340,000 and I have to go back to work at 73 to survive. Maria now works part-time at a grocery store, struggling to pay rent on her pension unit because Chinese bribes and Russian mercenaries destroyed her retirement security. She's one of nearly 1 million Australians whose financial future has been sacrificed to authoritarian regimes while Australian politicians did nothing. ASX data shows that $23 billion was wiped from Australian mining sector valuations in a single day after the Burkina Faso seizure. That's $23 billion in Australian wealth transferred directly to hostile foreign governments without compensation, negotiation, or consequences. But there's one thing that could save Australia's mining future and recover some of these losses, if our politicians had the courage to implement it. But wait, before we continue, please subscribe to ensure that you never miss out on any of our essential videos. Comment, "I subscribe" below, and I will personally welcome you to our community. With that said, let's get started. Australia could partner with other democratic nations, the United States, Canada, the UK, and European Union, to create an international coalition that isolates countries engaging in resource theft. Norway successfully used this strategy to recover billions in seized assets from Venezuela through coordinated legal action and diplomatic pressure. The International Court of Justice has clear precedent for ordering compensation when governments illegally nationalize foreign assets. Australia could lead a coalition of affected countries in filing joint legal challenges while implementing economic sanctions that make resource theft too expensive to continue. The tools exist to fight back, explains Dr. Jennifer Walsh, an international law expert at the Australian National University. But it requires political will and diplomatic coordination. Australia could recover most of these losses through sustained legal and economic pressure. But instead of fighting back, Australian politicians are too scared to confront the China-Russia alliance that's systematically stealing Australian wealth. They'd rather let ordinary Australians lose their retirement savings than risk diplomatic conflict with authoritarian regimes. If Australia doesn't act now, every overseas investment becomes worthless. Every super fund with international exposure becomes vulnerable. Every Australian with savings becomes a target for foreign economic warfare. So here's my question for you, and I want you to actually check this after watching this video. Do you have mining stocks in your superannuation fund? Are you worried about your retirement savings disappearing to foreign governments who see Australian wealth as easy targets? Go check your super fund's investment portfolio right now. Look at how much money you have invested in overseas mining operations, especially in Africa. Then come back and tell us in the comments what you found, because this might just be the beginning of the biggest wealth transfer from Australia to authoritarian regimes in history.